Salams, this is People's Dispatch, and you're watching the Daily Roundup, our selection of some of the top news stories from around the world. Here are today's headlines. Palestinians protest displacement in Khan al-Ahmar. Brazil and Argentina discuss a common currency. The United Nations expresses concern for the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. And the US and the EU announce a fresh round of sanctions on Iran. First up, hundreds of Palestinians gathered on the 23rd of January near Khan al-Ahmar in the occupied West Bank to oppose Israeli plans to forcefully displace its residents by demolishing their village. The protesters gathered after calls for demolition were issued by the ultra-right-wing interior minister in the Benjamin Netanyahu government, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Following the removal of an illegal Israeli outpost called Or Shaim in the region, Ben-Gvir had claimed that his government would not make a difference between the Jews and Arabs and demanded immediate demolition of the Palestinian village on Monday. Maruf Rifai, legal advisor to the Palestinian Authority, who participated in the protests, told Al Jazeera that Khan al-Ahmar was Palestinian land and there was no excuse for the Israeli government other than to develop the Greater Jerusalem Plan in order to clear this area of Palestinian Arabs. Khan al-Ahmar is located in the occupied West Bank, just outside Jerusalem and between Male Adumim, one of the largest illegal settlements in the region, and Kfar Adumim. Nearly 180 people, mostly Bedouin, live in the village. Israel wants to expand the area as E1, expanding the existing settlement of Male Adumim and linking it with Jerusalem in order to cut off the occupied East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. The project is part of its Greater Jerusalem project to obliterate the distinctive identity of occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli authorities issued an order to demolish Khan al-Ahmar in March 2010. A lawsuit was filed against the move, which led to a postponement of the plan until May 2018. In September of that year, the Israeli Supreme Court finally green-lighted. Brazil and Argentina's presidents, in a meeting on Monday, the 23rd of January, proposed the creation of a common currency between the two countries to facilitate and improve bilateral trade and commerce. The proposal was discussed during the visit of Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to Argentina. He is currently there till the 25th of January, where he met with Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez. In a joint statement, the two leaders said that they have taken forward the discussions for the creation of a common South American currency. In the beginning, the plan is for only Argentina and Brazil to use the proposed common currency. Over time, though, the more countries in the continent and the wider region could potentially adopt the currency for trade and financial activities within the region. According to reports, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, on the same day, announced his support for the proposal by the two countries. Celebrating the announcement as a sign of the independence, union and liberation of Latin America and the Caribbean, Maduro said that his country will support the initiative of creating a common Latin American and Caribbean currency. Maduro especially noted the significance of the proposal in the face of the increasingly coercive economic sanctions and related restrictions that the US has imposed on Venezuela and a number of other countries in the region. Maduro's comments came while he was participating in the Great National March taking place in Venezuela against the arbitrary economic measures taken by the US. He congratulated the Venezuelan people for concluding a massive march successfully and showing that the Bolivarian people stand peacefully and united against the US's arbitrary and illegal economic blockades and sanctions. Also on Monday, the United Nations warned that the humanitarian situation in war-torn Afghanistan is worsening with each passing day, adding that the country faces a very serious risk of complete systemic collapse and humanitarian catastrophe. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, says that the country is facing a myriad socio-economic problems such as widespread hunger, malnutrition, poverty, unemployment, declining healthcare standards, and an economy that's struggling to recover after nearly 20 years of war and civil conflict between the Taliban and the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces. Over and above this, the UN says that the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban in August 21 reversed a number of social rights. These include important rights for girls and women in the country, including the right to education and the right to work. The Taliban has also embarked on a campaign of repression against any sort of dissent or criticism from civil society and human rights groups and exerted very tight controls on the free and independent press in the country. The UN noted that the country, since the takeover by the Taliban, has been cut off from direct international development assistance, which previously accounted for about 75% of public expenditure, including in the very critical public health system. In addition to the suspension of international aid in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover, the US imposed a freeze on Afghan central bank reserves worth about $9.5 billion US dollars. Both these factors have resulted in a massive slump in the economy in the subsequent period, with reports noting that more than half of Afghan households are experiencing economic shock in the last 6 months. Over 17 million Afghan citizens, out of a total population of about 43 million, are now facing acute hunger because of the economic crisis. 6 million of them are suffering from emergency levels of food insecurity and are on the brink of famine. Overall, the economic situation has left over 28 million people in the country dependent on humanitarian assistance for their day-to-day survival this year. The UN, however, did not mention the role of the invasion of Afghanistan by the US and NATO forces. And finally, the United States, the UK, and the European Union have imposed new sanctions on Iran over its crackdown on domestic protests going on in the country for the last few months. The protests against the Iranian government erupted in September last year after the custodial death of a young Iranian Kurdish woman named Mahsa Amini. Amini's death sparked nationwide protests against the government, which were allegedly met with police repression. Iran's government has accused the West of instigating and encouraging these protests and of violating the country's sovereignty by interfering in its domestic affairs. The US has imposed sanctions on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and its senior officers. It has sanctioned also the IRGC Cooperative Foundation, along with 5 of its board members, the Deputy Minister of Intelligence and Security, Nasser Rashidi, and 4 senior IRGC commanders. The EU, meanwhile, has sanctioned 37 Iranian officials and entities, including some IRGC units. The sanctions came just a day after the European Parliament voted by a majority in favor of designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization, a move that has been strongly opposed and condemned by the Iranian government. Iran has threatened severe consequences if the EU goes ahead with the designation, even saying that the talks for restoring the JCPOA nuclear deal between Iran and world powers could potentially be suspended. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Daily Roundup. For more of these stories, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.